All right, welcome to Agile with Norm, and today we're going to talk about how to have good retrospectives. All right, let's start out by talking about the retrospective. So the retrospective is a Scrum event. The Scrum Guide recommends that this event should have a 3-hour max time box, and that is for a month-long sprint. Ideally, our sprints are much shorter than a month, hopefully somewhere around 2 weeks. That way we can actually use this event to inspect and adapt and get better on a more frequent basis. The retrospective event, I feel like it's a favorite of Scrum Masters. It was certainly my favorite event as a Scrum Master. We get everyone together, we're pulling ideas out of everybody, and we're coming to a consensus on how we can be better as a team in the future. So really the purpose of the retrospective is to inspect and adapt, right? We're as a team coming together, reflecting, looking at our process, the work we're doing, the work we've done, the value we've created, feedback, metrics. We're really reflecting on anything that could make us better as a team. And then we're going to come up with some experiments that we're going to try. And I'm using the word experiment because it's not always going to make us better. We're going to try something and we're going to learn. Did it make us better? Is this something we should keep doing? Is this something we should stop doing? But it's an experiment. There's going to be an idea that it will make us better. We'll try it and we'll actually see if it does or not. And again, this doesn't have to be about, just the work we're doing. It can be about our process. It could be about the work. It's not constrained to any one thing. This is just anything that can make us better as a team. So this is what I'm going to cover in this video today. I'm going to start out with, that we should prepare. I'm going to talk about how we keep them fresh, our retrospectives, how this is supposed to be a safe space, how it's supposed to be fun, and then we're going to cover more of the techniques and tactics, which is likely why most people are watching this video. So first up, I want to talk about preparation. For any Agile event, any Scrum event, we really should be spending time to prepare for it. I like to spend, if it's an hour event, I like to spend at least 30 minutes preparing for it, making a plan, setting up, workshop things like boards, whatever I'm going to need. I like to do at least half of the time that event's going to be, I like to spend it preparing. And then even right before the event, I usually like to take 10 minutes, just run through my agenda, refresh myself on my own plan. So again, I like to have a plan. I think it's really important. And especially for retrospectives, I like to have a backup plan, right? In a retrospective, I'm going to try to pull ideas out of my team members and talk about what we can do to get better. But if the team isn't just coming up with anything, I like to have a backup plan in the back of my head saying, okay, well, maybe we selected 10 story cards and we only got 5 of them. We committed to getting 10 done, but we only did half the work. So there's a problem there. And if the team's not going to, put anything out there, maybe I'll throw that out there and say, hey, let's talk about this then. So it's always good to have a backup plan. And then lastly, a lot of the time retrospectives are following reviews. So it's important to consider the feedback you got in your review. So as a Scrum Master or anyone else attending these events, always consider the review and keep that in your mind as well. All right, the next item I want to talk about is keeping it fresh, right? You want your retrospective to be fresh and engaging to the team. You want everyone, really paying attention, in the zone, having fun, and really enjoying the retrospective. So it's important to try new formats on occasion, right? You got to be able to read the room. If everyone's tired and the things are becoming a little robotic, maybe you're just not getting the engagement you were before, switch up the format, try something new. Next on my list here is know the team, right? I've worked with a lot of different teams and different personalities, and when it comes to different people, they react differently to things. So know your team. If you've got a team of quiet individuals, you're going to need a different technique that really focuses on really getting everyone speaking. So know your team and keep your format fresh and make sure it works for your team. The retrospective is really supposed to be a safe space for the team. So when it comes to this event, I don't recommend inviting higher ups or managers or anyone really outside of the team, right? This is an event for the team, for them to reflect, and come up with ideas on how to get better. And you really can't have those great conversations if they have a manager there they're afraid to speak about, right? If they're thinking, if I say this, the manager's going to hear it and then get mad, you're not going to get the feedback you need. So it's important to make sure that the meeting is just for the Scrum team and you're inviting the right individuals to that event. It's also important, and you should say this if needed at the beginning of your retrospectives, that this event is not for finger pointing, right? We're not here to blame people, but we are here to talk about things that didn't go well, right? If something happened that went bad, let's talk about it. Let's try not to blame people or point fingers. There's not a lot of value in that, but let's talk about what actually happened, what went wrong, how we can avoid that in the future. That's a big part of this event, right? Reflecting and getting better as a team. So another thing about retrospectives, I like to make them fun, or at least have them start out being fun, right? These are events where you want everyone talking, and you can't do that if everyone's in a bad mood, right? So always come to these events with, a positive, energy, put out that positive energy. I like to start out with a fun icebreaker, something that gets the team, a little energized and having fun. And I like to really try to keep that good environment so I can make that conversation happen that's really needed for us to have a successful retrospective. All right, now we're going to get into the techniques and tactics, which is likely the reason a lot of you are here. So this is how I like to run my events, how I approach them. Specifically when it comes to retrospectives, I always have a plan and an agenda thought out ahead of the event. And it usually runs with these 6 items here listed. I usually will have an optional event introduction. So this will again be covering like, hey, this is a safe space. Everyone should feel fine talking. We're not here to finger point. I especially like to have this when I have new team members, really introduce them to that, the retrospective. We're trying to come up with ideas on how we can be better as a team. They're going to be experiments. They might not always work, but we're going to try them and we're going to hopefully get better in the following sprint. So I always like to do some sort of optional event introduction. Then I like to do an icebreaker, and we'll jump into these other points in more detail in the next slides here, but I like to do icebreakers. Then I like to have a technique to generate ideas. I want to brainstorm and could put a whole bunch of ideas on how we could be better out there. And then after that, I want a technique to focus, to create some focus, right? We're going to have all these different ideas, and we're not going to try to boil the ocean, but we are going to try to pick a few of those ideas and then focus on those. So once we've picked our ideas, we're going to need a technique to problem solve, right? So we're going to select maybe, anywhere between 1 and 3 ideas is usually what I do. And then I like to have a technique that I'm going to use for each one of those ideas for us to problem solve on. And then after that problem solving's done, I want to make sure that the whole team has agreed to what we said we're going to do. Because if someone doesn't believe in it, then we need to have that discussion and get everyone on board or figure out what we may have missed. So this is really my technique, my approach, my agenda for doing retrospectives. So let's jump into some of these other items here. All right, first up is icebreakers. So I like to start out with, after I give that event introduction if needed, I'll do an icebreaker. The reason why I do this is it's a good way to get everyone on the team talking and feeling comfortable talking, right? You can do icebreakers that energize the team, that are just fun and get people in the right mood for conversation. And a lot of times when I do these, I'll do a simple fun question that lets the team member say something about themselves, because I like my teams to make connections, right? If I like playing video games, maybe I want to hear that other people like playing video games, and then we have something to talk about that we didn't know before. So I like to try to make those connections on the team, and I like to do that with icebreakers. And a good example of this is I'll do something like, if we were in a zombie apocalypse, what would be something you bring to the team, right? And maybe some people will say, hey, I'm a hunter, I like to hunt, I'd be a hunter, or I'm a defender. Or I had people say, hey, I like motorcycles, I'd be motorcycling and grabbing food and stuff like that. You hear all kinds of fun stuff when you do stuff like that. Another good, simple, fun one is, what's your favorite food? What are hobbies? What are like New Year resolution type things you're trying to do this year? So those are some good, simple, fun questions. There's a ton of those out there on the internet. You can just Google and find a ton of these. You can also buy books on these. They write books, and you can get tons of them there too. The next idea for like an icebreaker type thing is just to share something good. I've seen a lot of teams that like to do this. They'll start out with, hey, what made you happy this last sprint, or what is something good that happened to you last sprint? It's just a way to get people, again, talking and talking about themselves, not necessarily about the team or the work you're doing. But again, just remember, the idea with this is to create that right environment, right? Have everyone fun, get them talking, get them comfortable. So after we've done our icebreaker and everyone knows what the event is, then it becomes time to start generating ideas. And there are a lot of techniques to do this. The most popular one is to use these retrospective boards, and it looks something like what we have here on the screen to the right. You have a board with columns, and the idea is that people are going to put items in each of these columns. A lot of these tools will make it look like a sticky note, so someone will put a sticky note in what went well, what we could improve on. If there are ideas and actions, they can put that up there. But this is a really popular format that people use. Usually you'll let people, give people 10 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever feels appropriate for your team in your time box. You give them an amount of time and let them just add all the stickies they want to these boards in these different columns. And then you have a whole bunch of ideas generated, right? It's important to note here that while it might seem like the could improve column is definitely going to be the place where you want to be focusing, it's also important to focus on that what went well. Because if something went really well that you've never had go that well before, it's important to talk about why did it go that well, right? Because you might have some ideas or actions come out of that discussion that you didn't think about, and that wouldn't be in the could improve column. So it's important to keep that in mind. Also, when it comes to these types of retrospective boards, you don't have to use the 3 columns here shown on the right. You can also do like what we have underneath number 2 on the left. You can do 4 columns for things we've liked, things we've learned, things that we lacked, and things that we longed for in the sprint. We could also do a start, stop, continue in the sprint. And there's a whole bunch of other different word choices you could use in these columns. You could even create your own. But this is just a great idea. It's a really popular format for doing this and generating ideas. So another good way to generate ideas with a team in a retrospective is rating your sprints. I like to use this approach when I'm working with teams that are a little bit more quiet, where they're less likely to put up a bunch of sticky notes when we're generating ideas. So how this approach works, and again, this is just a different technique for generating ideas. There are lots out there. There are a lot more you could find out there and use. But this is one of my go-tos for quiet teams. I'll usually do this in every retrospective. I'll ask the team to rate the sprint 1 through 10, 10 being the best, 1 being the worst. And what I'll try to do is get everyone, like in a chat program, or I'll use some sort of tool that will let them enter their rating and then reveal it all at the same time. So if I'm using a chat program, it'd be like, okay, I'm going to count down from 3 and then everyone hit enter. So everyone puts all of their answers at the same time. So we're not, having other people change their number based on what someone else said. So we'll do that. And then usually what I'll do is I'll start at the bottom of the list if I'm using the chat program and going like, hey, you entered a 5. Why did you enter a 5? Or you entered a 10. Why do you think it's the best ever? And from there, I'll start gathering what they're saying about why they rated it that way. And then at the end of that, I'll try to take all that feedback, capture it, and group it so the whole team can see it. And then we have our list of generated ideas from that discussion. Now, again, this is a really good technique for quiet teams. It doesn't really single anyone out for being quiet. It makes everyone have the same amount of discussion. So it's a better technique than, specifically calling on someone who's just being quiet, who doesn't like to talk, because I think a lot of people don't like that. So using a technique like this, I think it's really helpful for those quiet teams. Also, when you do something like this, you can create a new metric for your team, right? You can average that rating every time, and then you can graph it and be like, hey, look guys, we rated ourselves, a 5, which 5 isn't very good if you're considering a 10-point scale. And then the next sprint, you're 8, you could celebrate that, right? That's something that's good. It's another metric in a way to reflect and learn more about your team. But anyways, this is just one idea for quiet teams. There are more out there. All right, so once we have our list of ideas, we need to decide what we're going to focus on as a team. And this can be a little bit more trickier than it sounds. A really good Experienced facilitator is going to be able to do this really well. Some others might struggle with it. So I recommend, especially if you're new to facilitation, pick a number, 1 through 3, and just stick with that and start out with that. Then as you get better, maybe you can realize, hey, this is a really quick thing. We're not going to select it to focus on. We're just going to do it. You can kind of make those judgment calls as you go. But for starting out, I recommend picking 1 to 3 and say, hey, we're going to try 3 experiments based on the feedback we got here, and we're going to take those into our next sprint. So we need to decide what 3 things we want to focus on. So you take all of those ideas that you just generated, and the best way to do this is just voting. If you're using a lot of the agile software management tools, you'll find they have built-in stuff for retrospectives or voting. If not, you can just use chat programs and enter votes or say the votes. Voting, it's pretty simple. You can come up with a lot of different ways to vote. But the idea is you want to vote and select the 3 highest things that are most important for the team, right? And this is a team decision, right? It's not any one individual. We want to select what the team thinks is going to have the most impact on our next sprint. All right, so once we've selected our ideas, we've voted for our top things we want to focus on and problem solve, then we need to have a problem solving approach. So as the facilitator, it's on you to have an approach ready for the team to use. Before we jump into the problem solving though, I always like to, again, level set on the problem. Say, hey, maybe you put this idea up here. You want to just give us a quick background so we're all on the same page as you before we jump into this. And then maybe somebody else on the team will add something. But it's a good idea to have a little discussion on the problem or recap it before you jump into problem solving. But once you've had that discussion, then it's time to use whatever technique you've chosen for problem solving. I personally just like to kind of almost repeat a retro board. What I'll do is say, hey, here's our problem. We'll have that discussion. And I'll say, what do we think are some ideas we could use to solve this? And then I'll just list out all the ideas that the team throws out there. And I'll say, all right, team, we have all these ideas. Which one do we want to pick to try to solve this? That's one way you could solve this. You could do a fishbone technique. There's lots of other problem-solving techniques out there that we could use to help us come up with an experiment to try to approach this problem in our next sprint. I mean, there's the 5 whys, right? You could ask yourself, okay, this problem happened, why? And then why did that? And then why did that? And then why did that? And you keep going down deeper until you get to more of the root cause, and then you try to work on that. There's just, again, an infinite amount of techniques out there, and I'll be listing some sites at the end of this video where you can go and get ideas on how to do some of this stuff. But it's important to have an approach ready to go in your retrospective if you're facilitating. All right, so after we've done our problem solving and we have our experiments that we're going to try in our next sprint, it's important that the facilitator does a recap of what we've decided on and make sure everyone's on board. So we ask, hey, does everyone on the team agree with this? It's important to do this because for our experiments to be successful, we want to make sure everyone's on board. And if anyone has any major concerns and maybe they weren't voicing them, this gives them an opportunity to do that. Also, perhaps some people are just never going to agree with the experiment. In that case, I find it's effective to just ask them, hey, well, can we just try this out and see how it goes? I find that to be an effective way to at least give something a chance of being successful. So after we've done that, we got everybody to agree on the actions that we're going to take, those experiments. It's important then for who's ever facilitating, which is usually the Scrum Master, to bring those to our next planning event, making sure that the team is, following the experiments that we've done. And if needed, you can create stories for the items, right? So if it's an idea about our process, how we're going to improve the way we're working together, you can create a story card for that says, hey, when we're doing this process, remember we're going to do this because of our experiment. Or if it's something for the product, you can create a story card saying, hey, we found this was an issue with the product in the last sprint. We're going to address it now. It'll help us in future sprints, in the next sprint, whatever. So sometimes putting these experiments into story cards is an effective way to really manage them. You don't always have to do that, but it's an option worth mentioning. So as I said, I list a couple sites for helping you out with techniques. These on my screen are 2 different sites that are great for getting techniques. One is tastycupcakes.org and one is the funretrospectives.com. Both of these, you can look up different techniques for retrospectives. The Tasty Cupcakes site also has things outside of retrospectives for just doing workshops on other things as well. But these are both great sites if you're looking for different techniques aside from the ones I've covered in the video. Definitely worth the look. All right, well, that's all I had for today's video. Please let me know if you have questions in the comments, or if I missed anything, call it out in the comments. I can add it into the video in the future if I ever go back and do some reflection and inspect and adapt myself. Also, like, subscribe, comment. I appreciate the feedback, and have a great one, everybody.